What is up, guys? This is Dedrian Colon from House of Wrestling, and I just finished watching the AEW pay-per-view Full Gear, and man, it was a pay-per-view. I'm going to mention briefly a few pros and a few cons that I had about the pay-per-view because it was a very long pay-per-view. Um, it started if you're in the Midwest, it started at 7 Central, and it finished it's almost, what time is it? It's 11. So you could say 11:19. So yeah, you could say it was about almost a 4-hour pay-per-view. Um, but man, a lot of memorable moments. Main one, congratulations to Hangman Page. He is the new AEW World Champion. So happy for him. What a story they told AEW. Kudos to you guys. The story started technically at All Out 2019, and it just progressed throughout the years, a 2 year journey. Um, it was such good storytelling. I can't give him enough credit for just that character. He is the first AEW World Champion that has not held a World Championship in another promotion. So that's another good thing about this title change. Um, but man, that was a match. There was moments where it felt like he wasn't gonna win. The Young Bucks came down, and it was like they were at a crossroads, whether they were gonna help him, whether they were gonna, it was. You have to see it to um, get what I'm explaining and everything. But man, it was so interesting. And Nick Jackson, maybe Matt, was it Matt? No, it was Nick Jackson. He looks at Hangman, not give him the nod, and Page does his thing, and he's a new world champion. But man, it was a good pay-per-view. One of the few cons I have is they could have used an intermission. I'll start off with that. Once you got to I want to say the Super Click versus Christian and Jurassic Park. I'm looking at my notes. If you're watching this video, I'm looking at my notes right here. And after that match, it's like they could have used maybe a 25-minute break just for people to unwind and everything. And I believe this is probably the second pay-per-view this year, or maybe third pay-per-view that fans. I wasn't the only one that was mentioning it. It was on Twitter also, and you know, a lot of people were just saying like, man, you could have deserved a break because once you got, after the Super Click match, you had Andrade, the tag team match with Andrade and Malachi Black versus Cody and Pac. Then you had Tay Conti and Britt Baker. Once you got to the women's match, that crowd was. Some people said it was dead. It was quiet. It was fatigued. It was like they were just like, man, can we get a break? Can we just something to break it up? And it wasn't until, man, you could say Kingston and Punk where the crowd got back into it. So it was technically two matches where it was just the crowd was just like, just you could tell, you could sense it if you were watching it. But man, that Eddie Kingston CM Punk match, another stellar match. Um, I enjoyed it for the fact that you had this heated promo that started everything. Then you had the follow up promo where they were at fisticuffs. And Eddie Kingston, that is the best opening match. Like, man, it was phenomenal, man. Just, just a cheap shot. Just you're thinking he's gonna shake his hand and bah, that's bah, knocked CM Punk out. You're like, oh crap, did he knock him out for real? Um, but man, that match was physical. It was brutal. They were just laying it in on each other. I mentioned it, and a few other people on Twitter mentioned it. It did have the Stone Cold Steve Austin, Bret Hart Survivor Series 1996 vibes, where it was just physical, and you could sense there was kind of a double change, double turn. Not saying it really, it went to the full extent, but you could sense that it was just like something's changing here because the crowd really got behind Eddie Kingston, and CM Punk started getting receiving more boos, and you're just like, ooh, okay. Um, it just feels like after this feud or with this feud that the honeymoon phase with CM Punk is kind of like ending, and now we're probably going to get a more gritty, intense, feisty, snarky CM Punk, which that's the CM Punk most people loved. And it's at the perfect time because we're heading into the last month of the year. Most of AEW shows in the last 2 years in existence have been somewhat okay. Last year was pretty good because that was when Omega did the turn and hey, I'll see you at Impact and stuff like that, which is like, whoa, this is pretty cool. Um, so it's a good way to go into 2022, especially knowing that you got the Supercard special or the special um, on TBS, or I think it's TNT. That's probably going to be on Saturday, Battle of the Belts. You have that. It's just a new year. You're going to have new talents and everything. I'm going to talk about that. So you want to freshen things up. But yeah, that match was pretty good. Um, MJF Darby Allin, that was a great opener. Those guys really set the mark. That match, I believe, is going to be a main event match for the AEW World Championship next year. Maybe it's a feeling or a hunch or something like that, but man, those guys really laid it in. Man, there were so many cool near falls, and it was surprising because it had a lot of technical spots in that match where you're just like, whoa, this is okay. And I think it's because we rarely see that from Darby Allin, more the high spots and stuff like that. And with MJF, because he mostly has squash matches, you're just like, oh, I didn't see this before. So it was pretty unique and rare. And I was like, oh man, it's pretty cool. The FTR Lucha Brothers match, which that was a really good match, really good match. Um, I the one spot that really got me into just goosebumps was the when the crowd start chanting Eddie, Eddie, Eddie Guerrero, and this was 16 years to the day that Eddie Guerrero passed away, and it was in Minnesota where AEW Full Gear was being held at. So it was just a lot of sentimental things, and man, that chant, man, just it was so moving. You're just like, oh my god, this is so cool. Ray Phoenix and Penta, you could see they started getting hyped up and just got into it, and man, it was so good. Um, the what was the other thing? Yeah, Dax attitude. That was funny. Yeah, that Dax Harwood. He looked at someone. What did he call him? An a hole. Yeah, he came loud over uh, the microphones on the TV and everything. I was like, whoa, that's what got me. I was laughing. It was just funny. Um, the ending of that match was there's a few endings of these matches where it was just like, all right. I mean, the match was good. Most of the matches were good, but then it was just like, that's how you end it. All right. Um, the FTR Lucha Brothers match ended with it was Cash putting on one of the masks that they previously had as the Luchadors, and the ref didn't know it was him, so Penta pinned him, and they got the win. So it was just like, all right, whatever. It is what it is. Um, so yeah, that match was pretty good. The Miro Bryan Danielson match, that was a man. That match was so good, really good. The contrast in styles, the aggression. What I liked about this match was that they really worked body parts. Miro worked Bryan Danielson's back. Bryan Danielson, he worked Miro's leg. Like, it was just a very technical match. And it's surprising from a guy like Miro's size. He's mostly a powerhouse, a monster, just annihilating people. And it was a very physically technical match. There you go. But man, it was a really cool match. The ending was I wouldn't say so like the FTR match, but it was kind of like, oh, okay. Um, you know, Brian Danielson, he had um, Miro in a similar submission hold that Roman Reigns had Brian Danielson on the SmackDown, the last SmackDown that Brian Danielson was on, the last match he had in WWE. So it was similar to that, and it was like, oh, well, that's interesting callback. But yeah, that was another ending that was just like, eh. Um, the Super Click versus Christian Jurassic Express, that match, it was pretty cool, but honestly, I felt like that match was way overbooked, and it went longer than it should have. Man, that match easily probably went over maybe an extra 7 to 10 minutes than it should, because it was, man, that thing was too long. Um, it just felt like they were trying to. I don't know if they were trying to extend time or anything, but it was just like they were doing things that kind of didn't make sense. Like they would go to the back, then they'd go to the back of the stage, then they would come back to the ring, then they would go back to the stage, then they would come, like it was just I don't want to say spot fest, but it was just, if they, I don't know, man, it was a really long match that, I don't know, it was just, it kind of took me out of it. I'm a fan of Adam Cole, the Young Bucks, Jungle Boy, and everything, but that match really didn't get me excited as far as, oh, this is what's gonna happen in the future and everything. It was just like, oh man, just end this match already. And that's the worst thing you could do, especially if you're watching. Um, if a wrestling pay per view has a match where you're just like, oh man, can this be over already? Not a good thing. The Andrade, Malachi Black, Cody, Pac match. I mean, I'm just gonna say it is what it is. It wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that good. I think a lot of people went into it expecting some type of turn. Some people were expecting Pac to turn on Cody. I know myself and a few other people were anticipating Arn Anderson turning on Cody Rhodes and aligning himself with Andrade, FTR, and Malachi Black. So it's just like, when none of that happened, it was just like, eh, all right, okay, it is what it is. The Ty Conci Britt Baker match. Ty Conti, I got to give her credit. She came out, she looked like a shoot fighter. Like she looked like she was kickboxing, MMA fighter. Like that's what she looked. She did not look like a professional wrestler. And she came out so intense. I've never seen her that intense in any match she had. Usually she's high and kind of bubbly and happy and everything. But man, she came out intense. Man, she put on a really good match. This was another match that, man, I think what kind of did them what did them a disservice was that the Andrade Malachi Black match was before them, and again going back to the Super Click versus Christian Cage and Jurassic Express. Um, that match really, because it went so long, it kind of took the air out of the crowd, the energy out of the crowd for the Malachi Black, Andrade, Cody Rhodes, Pac match, and then once it got to the women's match, it was like the crowd really didn't have any, like, that super in, like, oh man, this is, yeah, like it really didn't have that. It was just like, yeah, certain sections were like, yeah, but it wasn't the full arena in unison. It wasn't, not to say that it wasn't like super quiet, but it was very mellow. The energy, we're just like, okay, yeah. But man, it was, Ty Conti did her thing. Um, Again, the Kingston Punk match was really, really good. I loved it. Um, my honest opinion, I think this is going to be probably a trilogy or a feud that's going to go on longer because of the promos they cut and because of the physicality, the intensity, and the grit that they showed in this match. It's it's gonna go. I believe it's gonna go there, and especially after the match. CM Punk went up to Eddie Kingston, tried to shake his hand. Eddie Kingston blew him off, walked to the back, shoved one of the cameras. That was it. So you know there's going to be more to this. Um, the Inner Circle versus America's Top Team match. Um, man, I think what this pay per view, another con was that they had a, a Falls Count Anywhere match with the Jurassic Express and Christian Cage and the Super Click, which they fought all over the arena. And then the America's Top Team and the Inner Circle had a Minneapolis street fight, which is pretty much the same match. And I don't know, a lot of the spots were, by that time, people were just like, okay, we want to see Hangman Page and Omega. And right now, it doesn't come across in the arena, but online and just in general, you can kind of sense a tiredness, a fatigue of the Inner Circle as a faction. A lot of people want to see Sammy, Guevara, Santana, and Ortiz to move on. Everybody go their separate ways, and it's just like, oh god. And a lot of the reception from the past promos for the between the Inner Circle and the America's Top Team in the middle of the year have been very not well received. A lot of it has been, in many fans' eyes, misogynistic, homophobic, just late or early 2000s humor, outdated humor from Jericho. It just really, like, it was one of the few feuds that AEW has had where it was just like, people just didn't care who won. And that's rare. But AEW is a 2-year-old company, so eventually some of those feuds will, unfortunately, come about. Hopefully, it's the end of this feud, which I don't think so, and I personally am not happy about because I really want to see Santana, Ortiz, and Sammy Guevara move on to something else besides the Inner Circle. The Inner Circle is basically AEW's first faction, and right now they have so much talent and so many hints towards new factions where it's just like, okay, you kind of like gotta retire this, let it, go your separate ways. But it is. We'll see what happens. But I personally would just want the Inner Circle to go their separate ways. It's already time. It's long overdue. And then after that match, it was this was surprising. I didn't expect this. Tony Schiavone comes out. He's like, "Yeah, we got a big announcement. Welcome to AEW. Ring of Honor. He used to be with Ring of Honor. Jay Lethal is All Elite. He comes out. He says, "Hey, I heard this is All Elite. I heard about the Forbidden Door," and he challenges Sammy Guevara for the TNT Championship. And we're like, "Oh." You could tell the crowd is just like, "Oh, okay, this is interesting." And lo and behold, Sammy Guevara comes out. I accept. So this Wednesday on Dynamite, you're going to see Sammy Guevara versus the newly signed All Elite Jay Lethal. That's going to be interesting. It's not surprising that someone from Ring of Honor has already signed because of what's happened with Ring of Honor and them potentially, after this year going on hiatus. And once January comes, most of the roster is going to be free agents, and then whoever has a contract that extends beyond March, they're going to get paid up until March. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting what Jay Lethal does. If he brings back the machismo, the Macho Man gimmick, which would be very hilarious. I know there was some things about him in the past as far as being mentioned when the Speaking Out movement If that's the case, Eeh, that's a tough one, AEW. You got, man. But we'll see what happens and how this goes, and just he's going to be doing some podcast interviews pretty soon, so we'll hear his side and see what questions are asked about him regarding that issue, and go from there. Um, but man, it was a pretty good pay per view, I would say, from the first three matches: MJF, Darby, FTR, Lucha Bros. I'm looking at my notes if you're watching this. Miro and Daniel Bryanson, those three matches had so much intensity, grit, feistiness, physicality. Um, you could tell they were fighting for something. Those matches, oh, great matches. I could watch those over and over again. As far as the Super Click versus Christian Cage and Jurassic Express, Andrade, Malachi Black, Cody, Pac, um, I really can't put Ty Conti because they were just on the receiving end of just a crowd being fatigued. So you really can't, like, anyone who dogs that match, like, really that's unfair to Tay Conti and Britt Baker, because that crowd was already by that time fatigued. That crowd was pretty much there. You could say 5:36 when the doors opened. So you figure I believe by the Ty Conti match, that was already like 9. So they were already there 3 hours. So they were already fatigued. So I don't know. It was an interesting pay per view. My grade, I give it a B minus. Yes, I give this pay per view a B minus. Um, I would have given it a higher grade if a lot of these matches weren't overbooked. I wouldn't say a lot of matches, a few of these matches. The Super Click, Christian Cage, Jurassic Express match, if that wasn't overbooked, um, the Andrade, Cody, it was just, I don't know. They were good matches, but then the endings were so, and then some of the matches went on too long. Talent, phenomenal, but it was just, but yeah, I'll give it a B minus. The Hangman Page, Kenny Omega match, long overdue, and this is going to be fun. It kind of felt similar to when Moxley defeated Jericho at Revolution in 2020. But man, we'll see where it goes from there. It was pretty good pay per view. And we'll see what happens with AEW in the next coming weeks going into 2022 as they prepare for their change to TBS. So this is my review. I'm Dedrian Colon from House of Wrestling. Like, subscribe, follow this YouTube channel, and follow House of Wrestling on all social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Follow us. We're on there. It's cool. So thank you. I'm out.